Yeah, I'll start now, but
Um,
I think people are still trickling in a little bit, but how about we give it maybe 2 more minutes and then we can get started?
sure, sure.
Awesome.
And Chris, you've been there at Indeed for how long now?
Just past 12 years. So I joined in
12
October of
years.
2010. So the company was founded in 2004. So it was actually close to your size, about 130 people when I joined.
Wow, it's more than
Yeah.
15,000 now, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We just crossed
Wow,
15,000.
unbelievable, unbelievable, incredible. We'll talk about a lot of that as well because I'm sure not just our employees, but also a ton of circle members who are part of the community would love to hear about growth and scale and you know staying power as well. There's a lot that has gone on in the industry in your industry as well, and I'm sure 2012 was a momentous event for you folks. Being a part of
Mm.
Recruit, and then ever since. So I'm jumping the gun right now, but I'll just wait
Yeah.
for a couple
Oh,
more
great.
people to join. How's everybody in Austin? I mean, I'm sure you're in touch with the Trilogians as well. I see all the emails fly by.
Yeah, there's the email list and the Facebook group have been great to keep folks connected. So and I still see a handful, and we have a good group at Indeed. There's probably 20 25 people from Trilogy who are there. But yeah, it's I mean it's Trilogy was clearly a really interesting network because it sort of lasted for a finite period of time, and there's sort of still a business, but really like there were a bunch of people there for a period of time, and then everyone scattered. So it's not like alums at a school or something like that because there's no new members. So everyone is kind of frozen in time, but it's been really interesting to
Correct.
see the entire cohort sort of move on and do the various things that they have. But it still remains definitely the sort of most um, vital network in Austin
You're
for
right.
me. But clearly we have folks all over the world at this point. But yeah, it was
You're right. You're right. Absolutely. And I think kudos to. Sorry, it looks like some people have to go on mute. Jyoti probably. Um, and kudos to, I think, the team there, including some of you folks who came in early, and how we built this camaraderie that has lasted
mm,
almost 3 decades now. Just unbelievable. And Austin also sort of encircles you too, because people who were there, they never moved out. I mean, they just stayed in Austin. Many of them just stayed in Austin as well.
it's what brought me here, definitely.
You were
Yeah,
in.
it definitely changed the face of the Austin tech scene, no doubt.
So, Brand, why don't we start? If you could, yeah.
That sounds
Okay.
Awesome.
great.
Well, well, thank you everyone for being a part of this Circle Talk. We have with us the CEO of Indeed.com, an iconic brand that Chris has helped build since 2010 for almost 12 years. And we were just talking about how there were 130, 140 people when Chris joined, and it's more than 15,000 people now. It's a global brand, amazing. By the way, I see NFL presence, I mean Super Bowl and all that stuff. Like there's an amazing brand recall as well. And I've known Chris for almost 25 years now. He was my mentor, my manager, our leader. I will talk some of that as well. But really come a long way in these 25 years. Chris, thank you for being with us today. And maybe just start out with where you grew up and what shaped you in the early years. And we'll talk about Rice and come to Trilogy as well.
Great. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, and it's been really amazing. We were chatting before we started here officially about the Trilogy Network, and it's been so amazing to see where folks have gone, and the brief time we got to work together, and then to see everything that you've accomplished, and now with this new venture, it's just so amazing to see where you've gone, and to still have those connections is really fantastic. So so thanks for having me. It's great to get a chance to be here with all of you. So my I'll try to tell the shortest version of the story, because I did not come into tech on a straight line. Some people grew up coding from the age of 5 and knew that this is what they wanted to do. I'm older than probably everyone on this call, so I just turned 55 in September, and so when I grew up, there was not a software industry that people were aware of or thought of. And nobody was growing up in the 60s and 70s thinking, oh, I'm going to be a software developer and that's going to be cool and I'm going to, make a lot of money. That didn't really exist. So I got an Apple II in 1979 and sort of like, did with it what I could. But by the time, my high school had no computer science. I was sort of a math and physics kid, and went to undergrad. And actually, by the time I got there, I was kind of burnt out on engineering. So my undergraduate degree is in architecture, and so I got a pure liberal arts degree. Started out in design, found out I had zero talent at all, and then ended up getting a degree in architecture history and theory. So kind of like art history, but spent 4 years thinking about and learning the principles of design and how humans interact with space. And architecture, it turns out, is a lot like software in that it's this intersection of art and math. It's engineering and design. I wasn't thinking about any of that at the time, but I was drawn to that. I met my wife, my now wife, when I was in college, and she grew up in New York. I grew up in LA, and we decided to get away from big cities. So we moved to a small town in rural Vermont with 3,000 people. And I taught public high school, special education, for 2 years. Actually, my first job before I moved out there with her. So my first job right out of college was working at an adolescent psychiatric hospital with young addicts and alcoholics. And I did that for 6 months. And then I moved to Vermont to be with Lizzie. Tried to get a job. I loved working with kids. Tried to get a job working in the recovery field, couldn't, and started teaching, and then spent a couple years doing special education teaching. And those jobs were, looking back, definitely the hardest jobs I've ever had in my life, but also incredibly profound and gratifying in being in a position to sort of have a mission and a purpose to helping people. And so that was really inspiring to me. My wife then went to graduate school in Los Angeles, and so we moved back there. I spent 2 years working with my grandfather, who was dying of cancer, who I was really close to. So I got to spend the last year of his life working with him. But then on the side, I was pursuing another passion of mine, which was music. And so I played music full time for 2 years. As I like to say, tried to become a rock star and failed, but would do it all over again. Still have my drum set behind me here.
I can see that, yeah.
And then Lizzie got a job at Rice University in Houston in 1993, and that's what took us to Texas. And I could take undergraduate classes for free as the spouse of a staff member. And so I kind of thought, this was 1993, and again, there was still no software industry that looks anything like what we had today. There was no World Wide Web. The internet obviously has been around, but none of that was there. But I thought, let me try this computer science thing. I'd gotten my first email address in 1990, and I had a couple of friends who had moved abroad, and we were in contact, and it was like, oh, this is amazing. You can just type this stuff up, and it's all obvious now. But in 1990, it was pretty radical. And so I basically signed up for a full load of undergraduate CS classes, and just fell in love and immediately figured out this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I ended up staying at Rice and got a master's in CS, and it was really very much a right place, right time kind of thing. So I was there from 93 to 96, and Mosaic, which was the first widely available web browser, was released. As far as I know to this day, no one has disputed this. My boss and I was working at the Information Systems Lab at Rice, installed the first web server in the state of Texas, is.rice.edu, when HTTPD was first released from NCSA. and sort of this web thing then kind of happened. And then also when I was there, the first version of the Linux operating system, the 1.0 kernel came out, the first version of the Java programming language, and Amazon.com all launched in that 3-year period. So the world kind of turned on its axis. And I originally thought, I know that you were in a PhD program, like my plan was to go and get a PhD and go into academia and teach, because I'd love teaching. But then suddenly this whole, professional world kind of opened up, and a bunch of people from Rice went to Trilogy, and they were really smart, and I enjoyed working with them. So I followed them to Trilogy. Started as an engineer. I spent 3 years as an engineer there. And then in 1999, so right around, so you started did you start in 98?
99 January.
99. Okay. So in 99, I moved into a management role, and it was, and I'm just totally, honest about this. I'm not sort of proud about it, but like I didn't want to do it because I just wanted to build things. And my manager at the time was Scott Snyder, who was the VP of engineering. And Scott said, "Hey, this platform that you built, we'd like to build a team around it. And I think you should manage that team." And I said, "Look, managers are people who can't code. I'm not interested in that." And then he, I'm not proud of this, but he said like, "Okay, well, this other guy is going to manage the team then." And I was like, "Well, I don't want to work for him. So, okay, I'll be the manager." But what happened was I found out that, having a combination of, and I was looking on your website and I saw your sort of like 5 principles or core values that you have, and that, sort of, being human is one of them. And so like I came to this because I'd done these other things, and I was a teacher, and I, worked with kids, and I found that I had a deep care and concern for people, and I understood the technology, and the combination of those actually made me able to help people get better at their jobs. And as much as I loved coding and wanted to do that if I thought about the impact, like what could I get done, I realized the 10 people can get more done than I can get done. And if I could help those people be better at their jobs, then I would be able to sort of be of more value and help other people, and help those people help other people, and sort of saw the opportunity there. So I think that's when we met, and you were one of the first people that I got a chance to work with in that capacity. And clearly, there's people who are better at this than me. So that, it was the right move for me. And then from there, I mean, there's a long sort of set of things that came from there, and we can talk through it, but I'll just say really briefly that what happened to me is, and I think that this is something that happens to everyone, is hopefully at some point along the way you figure out where you fit and where you can actually provide the most utility and value, and it's not always the thing that you want to be good at. So like I always wanted to be the best. I was a kid growing up, and like I wanted to be the best athlete or the best student. I wanted to be the best musician. When I got into CS, I wanted to be the best engineer. I was really good because I was incredibly thoughtful and careful. But there were always, I don't know if you remember Sean Smith. So Sean is one of the smartest engineers in, at Trilogy and in the city of Austin. And I could bang my head against the table for a week trying to figure something out. And then I would go to Sean and I'd say, "Hey, Sean, I'm really stuck on this." And he'd say, "Oh, it's just that." Right. And it was just, it just came so naturally to him. And at some point I figured out that there were, I was not going to be the best in the world at that. But what I was good at was recognizing talent in other people, and then helping them see where there were opportunities to get better. And that it was really helpful once I sort of figured out that was something that I could do, and I could do well, and bring together the sort of the technology and the humanity, which then evolved into, I mean, there was that was a crazy time at Trilogy. We were growing really rapidly. And in 11 months, I went from an engineer to managing 10 people to managing 30 people to the VP of engineering. And I had no management experience. I'd never done any of this before, but I was suddenly running a 300-person team. And part of that was just that I was one of the few adults there. everyone else was like you, was kind of right out of school. And so I kind of learned a lot on the job doing that, but then figured out a few years into running the engineering team that once we kind of figured out how to get software designed and built and delivered, reliably on time, and it worked, that actually the biggest problem that we had as an organization was that we were building software that nobody wanted and no one was listening to or talking to our customers. And so in 2003, 2002 or 2003, yeah, it was 2002. I took a voluntary demotion and quit my job as the VP of engineering to go work for our new VP of product. We just hired a guy as a head of product, and I basically spent the next couple of years learning about user research and talking to customers and understand. And that was the thing that ultimately brought all the stuff together, was that, thinking about and understanding people and what motivates them and how they make decisions, and how to reduce friction, and translate that into what should we build. That it's actually, that's sort of like the product manager is like the architect in that degree, and that going back to studying architecture, and it was sort of those things that all came together. And so I figured that out, and then a couple years later left and started my own company and did that for 6 years and had a bunch of amazing experiences. And then the market crashed in 2008 to 2010, and then found myself in 2010 looking for a job, and Indeed was looking for a VP of product. And again, it was very much right place, right time, and kind of landed here. And this is the sort of first place that I've been that kind of brought all this stuff together. The mission of the company is to help people get jobs, and everything that we do is really 100% centered on humans and the human experience, and what we can do to provide opportunity to people. And I've been really fortunate to be a part of this thing, growing from 130 to 15,000 people over the last 12 years.
Amazing. Such a fascinating journey. And I mean, even starting out with, redefinition to, not giving up, to trying out new things. But the thing that sticks out the most is humanism, being a humanist. I mean, even looking at Sean Smith and Gabe Wolosin, some of these awesome developers that we had, and how approachable they were and how accessible they were. I mean, they knew everything about Java when there was no J2EE and all that. So they were building a backbone when there was no such thing as the enterprise edition of Java or something. The standards were just barely coming out. And they were defining things. But I think there was not just a humanism in you, but also in them that I remember very well, and I think it's at the core of success of any company, is just whether the people who know the most, can they also be the most accessible as well. How do you find those people when you're interviewing for them? Because obviously over time the true character reveals. But say if there's any one or two signs that you look for when you look for people who are also humanists, not just great at their knowledge skills.
It's a great question. And so I'll say one of the things that we do, and I've always been a believer that, I mean, first of all, interviews are a terrible way to hire. Unfortunately, it's the best thing that we have, right? It's like the Winston Churchill line that democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. And it's really, it's flawed, right? It's very easy to be impressed or not impressed with someone and to be totally wrong about that. And there's, lots of good stories about how we've learned how tough it is. But one of the things that we sort of landed on early on is that one of the best things to do is to try to have people do something that's as close to the actual job as possible. And so, like a lot of other companies, when you have engineers, they should actually write code and build real stuff, not just on a whiteboard. And so one of the things that we landed on early on, especially when hiring leaders, so anyone who is going to be a manager at any level, the thing that we figured out was like 10 years ago, and it still, I think, is the most revealing exercise that we do, is in addition to all the other stuff we do, if you were going to come in and interview to be a senior product manager at Indeed, we would have you do a mock interview. And so what we would do is we'd bring another product manager in and say, all right, you're a senior PM at DevRev. Interview this person as if you were trying to hire them yourself. So don't pretend that you're an Indeed. Just like how would you decide that this is someone that you might want to have work for you? And there's a bunch of things that come out of that. One is you get a sense of what does this person think is important in that role, right? So how you interview, as flawed as that is, you've got the things that you think that you're looking for. And then we have one person who sits in and observes the interview. And so you get to see how is this person getting at what they're doing? How are they guiding this person, especially, and this is getting to your question, how do they work with someone who's struggling? It's very easy in interviews for people to come off as arrogant and for whatever reason, it's become sort of a competition sport. And some people really like making people squirm in an interview. Our point of view is that if we interview you and you're great, we want you to come work for us. If we interview you and the interview doesn't go well, I still want you to leave and say, God, that was the most amazing experience. I'm going to work my ass off and I want to come back in a year and get a job at that place. And having people feel bad because they're failing an interview it's just like, it's terrible. But for some reason in our industry, that's something that people do. So I'm really interested in how does someone guide someone, how they're struggling, when they're struggling. And then what we do is we do a debrief. And so we'll take the entire interview panel. That person will come in and we'll say, all right, you just interviewed Dheeraj. Do you want to hire him? Yes or no? And then let's talk about why. And the person who is the observer will come in and get a chance to ask some questions. So when you're asking, the question about the B tree, what were you trying to get at there? Why did you do this? And we then go back to the person who got interviewed and say, hey, do you want to work for this person? And that one is really, really revealing as well. Again, either it went well or it didn't go well. And that one thing of like asking and observing how people interact with people, and especially how they interact with people who are junior to them or who they have power over. So a manager-employee relationship, an interviewer-interviewee relationship, a parent and child relationship. There's this asymmetry in power. And how do people use that? Do you use it to puff yourself up, or do you use it to try to lift someone else up or bring yourself down to their level and connect at a human level? And that turns out to be, for me, like way more revealing and powerful than almost any other thing that I've seen. But it leads to, and I'll just share this also leads to me realizing how fragile and difficult interviewing is, because we have this guy, Ben. And poor Ben, when we started doing this, agreed to be the interviewee. And so we had Ben probably do this 250 times in a 3-year period. And when we do the debrief, 95% of the time, the answer was no hire. And Ben is one of the best product managers at Indeed, but he's a terrible interviewer. He like gets nervous and he sweats and he kind of stammers and he can't like get his words. He's like he's an incredible employee. He's been promoted multiple times. He leads a huge product area. He's an incredible mentor, and he's terrible. And like nobody wants to hire him. So like when we started doing this, it really helped me see how difficult it is in, a day of sit down interviews to really assess if someone is a good fit or not. And so, but that's been a really amazing exercise. And again, that specific thing of how does someone, the other thing that we do with all of the leadership hires is then we ask all of the executive assistants and all the other people who were like planning the visit, what that person was like, because a lot of times people will
so important
be crappy to an Uber driver or be crappy to the person at the front desk, and those are the people you don't want in the organization.
So true. I mean, I think what you just said, the last words about people throw their weights around, they just say, well, you're an EA, so I have to treat you differently. And somebody said this about integrity. It's the things that you do when nobody's watching. And in this case, you think of interviewers and peers and people you're going to talk to as people who watch you, but when they're not watching is when real character comes out. Very true. One of the other obviously difficult things about being a human is also knowing what is less, what is more, what is an excess. And we went through our excesses during the .com bubble as well, which is the era in which at least my career was seeded. And there were lessons of essentialism or lack thereof at Trilogy, or too many products and too much going on. And I think part of it was because we were a child of that era in some sense. But say more about those 3, 4, 5 years, and how it had an imprint in you, and over time, in terms of what less is more means versus more is less.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, like everything else, it's very easy to give black and white answers, but there's a lot of nuance because, I think there's a natural sort of ebb and flow to some of these things. And it's not just like you should always do this or you should always do that. So I can talk a little bit first about just really briefly about Indeed. When I joined, it was still startup phase. So we were, 130 people. We just hit about 4 million a month in revenue the month that I joined. And the company had been profitable for a few years and was growing 100% year over year. But part of the deal was that the two co-founders were absolutely single-threaded. There's one thing we're doing. We're putting job seekers first, and we're just trying to make search simple, fast, and relevant. And then we have this pay-for-performance business model, and that's it. And we're just going to get better and better and better at that. And any company that is successful will immediately start to see 1,000 different things that you could do. Oh, if we have this platform, then we can also do, we could do that over there. We could do this over there. And people are asking us to do this other thing. And so clearly at that sort of growth phase, it is really important to have incredible focus, or at least for Indeed, it was really valuable to have incredible focus and discipline. And the co-founders, my boss, Ronnie Kahan, who was the CTO, he just said no 99% of the time. And his whole thing was just to remind people, this is what we're doing. We're not doing that other stuff because there's so much more to do here. And we saw all of these other companies that were sort of the big players at the time, the monsters and the career builders, but also all these other startups who kept doing all these other things. And we just did this one thing and just got better at every single day. And that was the right thing to do. And then at some point, you can't just keep doing that one thing forever. And so we got acquired in 2012, and Recruit, most people don't know Recruit, but it's a 62-year-old Japanese company that's sort of, they have been around a long time, and they have redefined their business from being a business that basically did job advertisements in print to then early days of internet, of sort of bringing print to online and then classified ads, and then growing into a real global technology company. Indeed, when we got acquired, we're a tiny piece of them, and now we're a big part of it. But one of the things that we saw from Recruit is that it's important to sort of have a vision and a strategy, and also not to believe that I think a lot of companies get sort of sucked into this. Hey, we were super successful at this one thing, so anything we do is going to turn to gold. So like we can pick the next thing and the next thing, and then we're just going to beat everyone else because we are smarter and we have this big platform and we have 300 million users and whatever. And the answer is every successful product really is a perfect storm. And the fact that you got that first massively successful product is also a perfect storm, right? There were 100 other companies probably who had the same idea or tried to do the same thing, and you got there because you made the right decisions, but that doesn't mean that every decision that you make is going to be perfect. So what we sort of evolved into is what we do at a feature level within our product. So we have 5,800 A/B tests running right now. Like everything is like ruthless experimentation, and we believe that there's Elon Musk or Steve Jobs. There's the people who are just the pure product visionary and they're right all the time. I'm not one of those. Most people are not one of those. And if you try to model yourself on like I'm always going to be right, you're probably going to fail unless you're the next person for the next generation. So experimentation, testing, empirical measurement is really important. So what we've started to do is then say, how do we do that with products or product areas, and to build a culture of radical experimentation, but making big bets. The important thing there is you have to stop doing them. And so you can have focus and start to branch. But what you have to do, and we were bad at this for a while, and it took us a while to figure out, how do you do things? Bezos talks about this in terms of like, make as many decisions as you can that are reversible. If it's a reversible decision, then you can make those all day long. If it's irreversible, then you have to be really careful, and you kind of have to be right about it. So we have built an infrastructure. We basically, and we can go into this, we have an internal incubator. And we kind of took the old Trilogy University model and built an Indeed University for our new college grads. And then we built an incubator. And so we can run these, we can build products and run these experiments and do them at scale, but they get funded with a certain amount of money in a certain amount of time, and then they get shut down. Just like a startup, you run out of money and you have to come back and pitch to the board basically to ask for new funding. And once we develop this facility for having a discipline about shutting things down by default, then it allows you to be more experimental. And so you can still have this focus and you can try new things. And that's a hard balance. Now, that said, we've also gotten big and have a lot of things going on. And occasionally, and right now, we're looking ahead at the next 6 to 36 months. It's going to be a tough time. It's going to be a tough time for a lot of people. And that's where the ebb and flow comes in. So we've done a lot of experimentation for the last 5 years, and we're going to go back and we're going to take a look at those things. We're going to rationalize a bunch, and we're going to put a bunch of teams together that have been running in parallel and get focused again. And then in another few years, we might go back out. And so I don't feel like there's one answer or another.
Absolutely.
But having the discipline and the key for us is like, can you be good at shutting things down? If you can be good at shutting things down, then you can try a whole lot more. And so
so said.
The trilogy.com bust was sort of, we were in the unrestricted try a million things and had to make some tough choices then. But there wasn't a lot of discipline then about shutting things down. So I think we learned that lesson the hard way there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you say this about Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. I mean, Jeff actually would say this, that Prime, for example, for the longest time, he had to be really stubborn about it because everybody thought it's going to take the company aground. And he just kept it running. He's like, well, there is going to be a reason why Prime will actually make Amazon sticky. Even for Elon, I mean, like, there are people for the first 6, 7, 8 years of Tesla that were unwilling to invest in it. He put his entire $80 million of PayPal into Tesla because no one else is backing. Say more about tenacity and stubbornness and knowing when to shut down. Like, how do you find, what's the framework to think about this versus being tenacious? Because some of them just have a different time horizon.
Yeah, and again, so I love that humility is one of your principles as well. And so for me, in our core values, we've got these 5 core values. One of them is that we're data driven. So we use data to make decisions. And one of the things that, so as a business, before I ever got there, they invested an inordinate amount, given how small the team was, in data infrastructure. And so we have a platform that we built ourselves that we ended up releasing open source, but where we basically have, there's 15,000 people in the company. There's about 6,000 that have unrestricted access to all of the data at Indeed, every single thing that happens, hundreds and hundreds of terabytes of sort of to every single click on the site, every single job posted, every single resume created, and anyone can ask any question at any time. And what that does is we sort of like open sourced the information. So all of the reasons that we like the concept of open source software, you have more people looking at opportunities, more people who can find problems, and more people who can see, hey, there's something in here. But one of the things that comes from a culture where everyone has access to data, and you actually use the data to drive decisions, is that it creates a forced humility. If you design experiments and you measure things, then it doesn't matter what your job title is, and it doesn't matter how much you yell and scream and how much you say things. If you try something and it doesn't work, or it's just, like our simple math for our experiments, great and small, is a third of the time you find some improvement. A third of the time, there's zero measurable improvement. And a third of the time, you make things actively worse. And
Mhm.
so if you have really smart people who have access to near infinite data, and given all that, still like, 2/3 of the time, your ideas are not sound, then you have to basically start to accept the fact that we're like scientists who are doing research and trying to figure out what the right answer is. So you have to have a vision and a hypothesis, but then you have to let go of the results. You have to have humility about, my job is to discover what is out there and not to push my pet idea. So we tend to think very clearly around, we've got conviction about our mission and our strategy. The mission for Indeed is we help people get jobs. The strategy, and we can spend time on this if we get to it, is to get closer to the hire. So we started out as a search engine. We aggregated millions of jobs from all over the place. You'd come and you'd search, you'd see a job, you'd click on it, and then you'd leave. But there's a huge gap between clicking on a job and actually getting hired. And if our mission is to help people get jobs, then we need to bring more of the hiring process onto Indeed. So we need to have jobs that live on Indeed, employers who are on Indeed, who are interacting with the candidates, who are giving us feedback on the quality of those candidates, who are communicating with them, scheduling interviews. We now have video interviews. So that allows us to automate that entire process and get smarter and smarter with the data and the machine learning, and to make it simpler and faster. So we have conviction. That's like the level of conviction. That's what we're doing. We're trying to get more and more hiring onto but how we get there, I've got a bunch of ideas that are my pet ideas that I'm super passionate about, and I'll talk about them all day long. But then we're gonna try stuff, and if it doesn't work, then so it's important for me to have conviction at the right level. If I get hung up on a feature, which I do because I care about stuff and I have a lot of ideas, but if I get too hung up on that, you can drag people off the edge of a cliff. So having conviction at the level that what we're trying to do is bring more of the hiring process onto Indeed. And if we can do that, I know we can optimize it, make it simpler and faster and better. And we can do it for cheaper for our customers, and we can help more people get hired. And so we're relentless about that. But all of the other stuff, we have to be passionate about, but also it's kind of like when I had my startup and the startup failed at the end, I kind of had this sort of insight that I've used this analogy. I think that there are sort of two patron saints of like innovation, and it's Don Quixote and Mr. Spock, and you need both. So like you have to have the Don Quixote thing. You have to wake up in the morning and believe like the rest of the world is wrong. Nobody understands this is exactly how it should work, and you have to put on your silly hat and get on the horse and like and tilt at the windmills all day. And then on a regular basis, you need to like take off the hat, put on the Mr. Spock ears, and look completely logically and unemotionally and say, is this working? And
so true.
And then make but then you have to take that off and put the silly hat back on, because if you're just Mr. Spock, you'll never do anything interesting. And if you're just Don Quixote, you will go off the edge of a cliff. And so you need both. And so you need to either be a person who magically has both of those things, or you need to build an organization that has both of those sets of thinkings and make sure that they have it out, right? It's you can't give Mr. Spock all the power. You can't give Don Quixote all the power. You have to have checks and balances. But if you do that, then you can actually do some really great things. And you just, again, it's that same thing. You have to know when to stop and when to put your energies behind the next thing. But that's humility. That's humility is like, we're going to find out what the right answer is.
Very profound. And speaking of paradoxes, and I mean, I call it walking a tightrope, an entrepreneur's job is to really walk a tightrope. And the bigger the company becomes, the higher the tightrope goes as well. So the fall is even more painful, Talking about discovery, we have started to talk about product discovery as a formal thing. How do you get your product managers and your developers to truly understand and to discover what customers really need?
So there's nothing more valuable than using the product yourself. I'm sure you guys use your product for everything that you do. But we operate at multiple different levels. I mean, one is we have, as I said, a ridiculous amount of data available, and people are looking at it all the time, so they can see what's happening, and then they can pivot and they can dive into areas and then sort of look for things. But then we spent a lot of time talking to clients. When I started at Indeed, we just did the data thing, and then we introduced user research, and so we have a really healthy mix of quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative is really good for telling you if something is working and showing you where something isn't working, but it's not very good at telling you why. And so you have to talk to people, you have to do user research. But when you add on that, so I mean, I think to some degree, building a product like in a business like yours, which you are a natural customer for, that's an amazing thing, because you sort of, you are the target audience. When I started at Indeed, most of us, when's the last time you applied for a job? Was it Trilogy?
I think the last one was 2007, Astrodata.
Okay, so that's a long time ago,
15 years
right?
ago.
You don't know anything about what it's like to be a job seeker. I don't know anything about what it's like to be a job seeker. You know something about hiring, but when I started at Indeed, we had no hiring platform, and none of us were job seekers, and so we weren't the typical user. And we could test our product, but unless you're really a job seeker, you don't know what it's like and what you're willing to do to try to make something work, and how desperate you might feel if you've applied to 100 jobs and haven't heard back. And then we built the platform that I talked about to bring hiring onto Indeed. When we started it, we really built it for small businesses because nobody had it, and that was the sort of the growth engine for about 8 years of the business. But I'll just say we once a quarter, our executive team all gets together, and we were in Atlanta last week with all of the VPs and above. And we spent 3 days, we do these case studies, and the entire case study last week was every group gets to pick one job, and we'll just grant you the budget to hire for that job if you can find and interview the person in the next 36 hours using only Indeed products. And so every single one of our leaders, we broke them into teams. They picked a job. They had to create a new account. They had to post a job. They had to put their credit card in. They had to figure out all of the products that we have and how they work together. And they had to figure out how to identify and target these candidates, and then set up video interviews and interview them by 6 p.m. the next day. And that was the most profound thing that as a team we've ever done. Because part of the deal is at our scale, we have, 8 or 9 different sort of customer experiences for resume search, or for posting a job, or for the automated interview scheduling. And all of those things make sense individually because the teams who built them are thinking about their little silo. But if you take a step back and come in as a new customer, it's a disaster. And there's I could sit all day long and tell people that this stuff doesn't make sense, but when they use it themselves, it was the most eye-opening thing we've done as a business. And we came away with the big takeaways were, this is a total mess, but oh my God, we had 18 recs that were very high level. So that most of them were sort of manager to senior director level, which a lot of people might have thought those candidates weren't on Indeed. And we did, for 18 recs, we did 250 interviews, within 30 hours of posting the jobs, and moved 50% of those candidates on to the next round of interviews. And so we also came away with, this thing really works, and it's a mess. So it's actually worth trying to fix this stuff. And then we also figured out that we're charging way too little, because we did all of that very successfully for a very small spend on Indeed, but it was really inspirational. So I think that, talking to user, there's no one answer. You have to do all the things. You have to look at the data, you have to talk to users, and then you have to use the thing yourself. And if you're doing all of those things, then you have a pretty good chance of triangulating that. But trying to use the product new as a new user, that's also really powerful. So when you hire someone new, make them create the account, and don't walk them through, and let them discover it again, because you've been using the product since the start. You know all the quirks, which menu item has the thing buried that's the thing that you want. But how does a new person actually discover it? There's no replacement for that.
You're right. The curse of knowledge. By the way, I'd encourage the audience to also think of some questions. In the last 10 minutes, we'll open it up. Competition. What about it? How do you deal with it? And how do you learn from it, and what do you discount about it?
That's also a great question. So we have two different sides of how we look at it. On the one side, we were the first to do what we do, which is this search engine for jobs, bringing all the jobs together. And so we've always paid attention to the people who are trying to copy us, but we can't like look at other people because they're on that side of the business, they're trying to catch up with us. And that was a million startups, in the early days. And then Google with Google for Jobs, and Facebook did jobs, and then they quit. And, so all these sort of big folks coming along. And so on the one hand, we can't really look backwards because we're the ones who are trying to push things forward. But then in the other side, for the things that we look at and say, how is a new area going to help us with our strategy of getting closer to the hire, then there's a lot of other people who are doing things. And so for me, one of the things that I always pay attention to, and I'd imagine, you've had this experience a lot of times, when I talk to our customers, I always ask them what other things they're using. And when a customer unsolicited says, "Oh, let me tell you, we're using, Textio which is a text editor that we can plug into our job platform that helps highlight language that is biased, so we can debias our job descriptions, and it's amazing and we love it." If someone tells you they love something and you didn't even ask them what, like, I always pay attention to that. And that's how we actually learn a lot about what's working, because any company can have a slick website and can have, a beautiful product video and a good sales pitch. But if someone tells you they're using something and it works, like that's always gets my attention. But the biggest thing for us is that, and I think, after this conversation, I'd love to hear more about your business. For what I could tell just from looking at the website, like, it's sort of a new category. So if you're doing something that's new, and it's drawing from other areas and there's analogies, but if you're doing something that hasn't been done before, then the biggest competition, if competition is what prevents you from getting new customers and growing the big business, the biggest competition is just the inertia of how things are done. And so we have competitors who we compete with for sales, but what we're really trying to do is change the way that people hire and change the way that people look for jobs, and understanding how hard it is to get someone to do something new. It's really important to have that. It's very easy for us as technologists to say, like, "Oh, this is so messed up. All we have to do is just build this thing that automates it, and then like it's going to solve all the problems." And of course it can, but human beings don't think that way. And what does it take to get someone to change doing something from the way that they are doing it, that even though it doesn't work, they just know what it is? And it's the very old line that we remember from the old days, right? No one ever got fired from buying IBM, because even if they hated IBM, it's just like, that's a safe bet. You know what it is, you know what it does. Getting people to change their behavior. So for me, like, competition is the entire HR market and every recruiter who is doing things in a slow and painful way, but not looking at them and saying they're dumb. They're just, this is the way that things work, and this is what they're used to. And how can we do something that every single one of them understands is going to help them be more successful? Because the other thing is that, like, in the enterprise software world, and I learned this a lot at Trilogy, and sort of came to hate enterprise software because this is really hard, is that the way traditional enterprise software works, and I think this is not what you all are trying to do, but traditional enterprise software, you sell to the business and then they force everyone to use it. And so if you're doing that, then the incentives for me as an enterprise software company is to build something that's easy to sell, but not something that's actually easy to use. And traditional enterprise software is like, nobody likes their expense platform. Nobody likes their HRIS. Like, these are things that you're forced to use because your CFO or your CIO made this decision. But if you can get something that individual users start using because it helps them be successful at their job, and then have that sort of bottoms up approach, then you can go, so like, look at like something like Slack, right? Or, Google Docs or things like that people adopted because it made some individual's life better. And then you can go to the CFO and say, "Look, you've got 4,000 people in your organization using this, and this is how they're using it. do you want a site license so you can manage security and data retention and things like that? That's actually a model that, it works really well if you build a product that is good for users. And so I think that that's a really important piece of it, is thinking about who you're building it for. And if someone is forced to use software, they're going to hate it. If someone chooses to use it, then you've got something really magical.
And that ties back to what you said about, if you can drink your own champagne, like, using your own product is the only way to learn to know whether you're going to love it or like it or indifferent to it as well. I think when you said something on IBM, I also realized that what has happened to IBM in the last 20 years is that people have left the mainframe as is. They didn't touch it, but they just took all the action out of it by hollowing the core. This happened to Oracle, Exadata, big giant machines. They went through this because they were so well crafted, and it took years and years and even decades to build those things. But don't just go replace it. But if you can take things out of it in a way that's seamless and happens every day. And so I think we definitely feel like hollowing the core is the only way to really change large monolithic systems as well, as opposed to trying to go displace it. And then because people are worried about such change, there's a tyranny of status quo that is the biggest product management thing in the enterprise. Like, how do you deal with status quo itself?
Right.
I want to shift gear. Maybe one last question from me, and then see if people out there have questions too. Just going back to humanism, I see you really like being passionate about it, is diversity, and realizing that this is the way you grew up. There was music and art and architecture, and you connect with people. And one of the key things, and I guess the core of it, is equity and fairness and representation and all that. Say more about the challenge and the opportunity and how you've done it differently.
Yeah. So for us, one of the things that, and I'll be totally honest about this, I was raised as a sort of, progressive liberal kind of thinker. And I think that I thought that I actually understood how the world worked and had a lot of empathy, and then had some pretty eye-opening experiences along. And I thought that Indeed is great because we have great people and we care about people. As we started to get bigger, we had the same kind of problems that everyone else does. And that when you start to look at the data of who's getting hired, who's getting promoted, who's getting paid more, as much as I thought everyone in Indeed was wonderful, we saw big disparities between men and women, between white people and people of color. And then when we look at our data and see what goes on in the employment world, all of the bias and barriers that exist in other areas of society, whether it's the criminal justice system, housing, education, healthcare, employment is really foundational to all of that. So we also just start to see, you read all this research, but then we see in our data the massive bias and barriers that exist in hiring. And so the sort of the view that we have, the kind of mantra is, talent is universal, opportunity is not. And we see ourselves as this sort of market maker of having this not just incredible opportunity, but sort of an obligation to level the playing field. And so we have pretty significant commitments. I'll just say the one area that's super profound for us is how we think about AI ethics and fairness in our algorithms. So if you take the fact that everything we do, so we have 300 million job seekers, about 4 million employers, 25 million jobs at any point in time, we generate a bunch of data about the connections in there. But employers are human and they're flawed and they make decisions, and there's tons and tons of research, and we've been able to see some of the stuff as well that the most famous one 15 years ago, University of Chicago did this exercise where they had they sent out same set of resumes to 5,000 jobs, and they had either the names Emily and Greg or Lakeisha and Jamal. So traditional white sounding name, traditional black sounding name. And Lakeisha and Jamal had to apply to 50% more jobs to get a call back. But the exact same resume, nothing else different. So it's really clear that this happens in the real world. So if we're building these algorithms based on data that's coming from humans, then we're just replicating them. You can look anywhere and see what happens in the real world when this is done. So for us, it's important that our business reflects the communities that we serve. And when the better that we get at building a more diverse and equitable and representative organization, the better we are at seeing these issues and at actually identifying them. And so we've built a huge platform around helping people who are formerly incarcerated, people with disabilities, people of color, all of the barriers and bias that people face, and helping educate our employers, helping to remove bias from the hiring process. But that means that we have to walk that walk. And so that's really, there's all the reasons that people should think about this in their organization. But for us, it's sort of foundational to how do we create a marketplace that is fair and efficient, and that we have to reflect that. So we've done a huge amount of work. And when I joined Indeed, I'll just be, frank, I was the 9th executive. I was the 9th middle-aged white guy. 8 of us were married with kids. There were no women on the team. There were no people of color. In the few years that I've been in this role, just in the last year and a half, we now have 5 women and 3 Black SLT members, and we've dramatically increased the representation within the company. But it takes a lot of work, especially if you didn't start out that way. So the earlier an organization can start thinking about these things, the easier it is to ensure that you have that baked into your. So we've had to build that into the DNA. It wasn't there, and it's taken us about 7 years for it to really become part of the DNA. And it has to start at the very top, but it has to be reflected everywhere.
Thank you. This is fascinating, Chris. I know we can go on forever talking about life and business and everything else. I know we ran short of time for any audience questions, but we'd love to take some later on and maybe send it over to you and see if you're interested in answering them too. But really appreciate the journey, just amazing, feedback and insights and everything else that you gave. I'd love to connect on the side and get some, opinions and observations about DevRev as well. But thank you again for coming over, and thank you to the audience for really, I know we are all camera shy here. Looks like nobody really opened up the video, but I'm pretty sure everybody was intently listening as well. And I saw some people from the network come in as well. So really appreciate you doing this.
That's great. No, and thank you all so much. And I'm really excited to see where you all take. I love the vision for your product and your business. And I think it's something that we definitely need. And I can't wait to see it grow and succeed.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, Chris. And for everybody who's here with the circle, I'll be putting a link in the chat with a sign up for our platform. We recently went general availability. You can get started with a bunch of free credit, kind of click around in our platform and get a feel for what we're doing. Really excited for what we're doing. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, as well as we have a widget that you can install on your platform yourself. That will really kind of link up your customer support, things like that. But if you have any questions, any problems with the product, definitely feel free to kind of use that widget for its intended use. So yeah, thank you all. And I'll go ahead and drop the link in the chat right now.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks, Brent.
Yep. Thank you.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.